Good morning. I'm Sam. Welcome back to the shop, and we're going to get started on part 2 of putting this piece of steel in this tabletop. So I'm going to go over and punch some hole centers. I have it all laid out with the hole spacing and stuff, so we'll punch some centers, and still trying to decide what might be the best way to drill this. I'd really like to get it up on the mill, but I'm probably going to have to make something to support it because it's 100 inches long, and it's a piece of 3/16 steel plate, but it's still pretty wiggly as long as it is. So I'm working on what I'm going to do there, but we're going to get the holes drilled. We're going to countersink them. We're going to make our template for the tabletop, do the router work, and I will be bringing you back and forth on this. And once we get all the cuts done in the wood and everything fitting right, we're going to put some kind of sealer on the wood. I'm not really sure what I'm going to use yet. Probably just some lacquer, just to seal this wood under the steel. And then we'll have to clean up the steel and get it ready to go on. The finish on it will be sanded with 100 grit on the DA sander. And then once it's all put together, we'll talk about how I'm going to finish it to match the base of the table. So let me get set up. We'll go over and punch some holes, and I'll get back to you shortly. Good morning. We're going to get into part 2 of preparing this big tabletop. This is our piece of 8-inch steel that we're going to inlay in the center. What I'm doing now is just start some holes here, punching them so I can get a nice drill center on them. And it's going to take a while. It's a lot of holes. It's a big piece of steel, so I'm still thinking of the best way to do this, but we'll figure it out. And anyway, I will get back to you as soon as we get set up. Okay. I've come up with a plan on holding this piece of steel to drill some holes. So you can see underneath I've cut a 5-inch block that goes in my vise. I screwed it to a bigger block that's just over 8 inches wide. I put a little fence along the back side, and that's one adjustment I won't have to worry about as I go down. It will hold the proper spacing that way, and all I'll have to worry about is the left and right. So you can see here that this is going to work just fine. And as I move it across, this box I have just seemed to work out really good on top of some sawhorses. So that works, nothing fancy. Cut a couple of little blocks to sit underneath it on the table. Here's another one here. Anyway, I think this will work. It's just going to be slow. And once we get some holes drilled and get into the countersinking, I'll bring you back and show you what that's going to be. Alright, we're back. I wanted to show you something before we get too much further. These little pilot point drill bits, I hope you can see that fine. These things for the machines are absolutely awesome. Because you don't need to go to a pilot drill. If you just go in easy with this little pilot point, it works really well. And you can see in the set that they have them all the way down to the pretty small sizes. And in the wood world, they're a little bit scary because they self-feed, so be careful with that. But those are great drills for metal work. Alright, I have one hole drilled and countersunk. Here's our screw. And this should be pretty much what the finished product's going to look like. Now, in this layout, I never said it before, but there's 34 holes in this thing. And if we go down here to the end, our big steel is going to be 1 inch. This is our 1 inch line right here. So I kind of put the screws over about on the 5/8 line so they're not too close to the end. But to do the math on the division of how many to do, I deducted this inch off of each end, which left me with 98, and I kept dividing it with numbers until I came up with something that was around 6 inches. That's kind of what I estimated I wanted my spacing. And I kind of take that from the legs. If you look at the legs, those are more on a 3-inch spacing. So I try to stay somewhat balanced, maybe is a good word. So anyway, there is 34 holes, 33 more to countersink, and my piece of wood and my box and all my props are working really well, but it is slow. And when we get through this, we'll come back and do something else. Alright, I was just downloading that last clip that I made about the countersunk holes, and I noticed that this table of gears showed up in that picture. So what I have here, all of these gears are meshing gears. This little pile over here is a pile of meshing gears, and then these right here, with the exception of these two, are meshing gears. And then I have these two hand wheels. I have, which will probably be the next videos, a pair of really awesome industrial tables to build. They will be on wheels. They're going to be 44 inches wide and 4 feet long. The base will be all steel. So it will be an interesting project, but I just saw the gears in the picture and thought you guys might be curious as to what are all of those gears for. So that's it, and there is a third piece to this, and it is a vanity base for a powder room, which is going to be made to look like a tree stump, which looks very much like this tree stump, which again, my crappy lighting. And over the weekend I did order some lights for the shop. Don't have them yet, but anyway, this vanity is going to be super cool too, and I will tell you more as I get closer to that one. There's the first sanding ground, so I'm going to change the wheel on the sander to a different wheel, and I will get it and I'll bring you back. Alright, this wheel, it's kind of like a Scotch-Brite. They call it 120 grit. So what we're going to do is this time take away any edges that 220 paper may have left, and then we'll switch over to the DA. Get a little bit closer so hopefully you can see what that first 220 wheel did to it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this, like I say, it's kind of a Scotch-Brite looking material. I'm not exactly sure what it is. They call the grit 120. So let's see what this does. Alright, it takes some of the coarseness of the sandpaper away. I tried to stop here so you can see the difference. I hope maybe you can. Through here, you see a lot more of the scratch. It's coarser. Here it's more of a polished look, which is absolutely perfect. All we're trying to do is get rid of scratches and stuff that's in the steel. So it's looking really good. Alright, I'm going to pull the camera over and see if you can see the texture difference between this sander. Now there's a lot more work to be done. This again is a very slow process. You can see a little bit of streaking from the other rotary sander, but we'll work that out, and then this is where I haven't done any. So let's keep working on it and we'll come back. Well, got it sanded the first time. There's a lot more sanding needs to be done, but I've sanded all the steel I want to sand right now. So, biggest thing I needed to do first though is get the steel done to make sure that this is the piece we're going to use. It is. Can't find anything about it that makes me not want to use it. Once again, the holes on the end where the machine screws are going to go are not countersunk. I did get the machine screws in the other afternoon. Didn't like them. The heads were way too small for a 1/4 inch screw. So I have some different ones ordered. Hopefully they're going to be what we want. If not, we'll try again. So here's a little recap. Over here on the mill, you can see my setup again. This board. Loosen the vise here. And you can see the bottom. That piece just sit in the vise, and I got the two put together nice and straight, so wouldn't have any problems that way. And I think that's probably about it. I think it's time to get some good measurements on the width of this steel and start building that template for the table. So we'll get that done, and when I get going on that, I'll bring you back. Alright, this is the start of the template. First off, I put blue tape on the table. I measured in at my 8-inch mark, or that left side of my 8-inch mark there. That's the right side, center mark. And here's the crack right here. So this thing's 100 inches long. So I got a full length of plywood, and then I cut a small piece to pocket screw to the end. And this wood has a veneer core and a thin layer MDF on each side. I really like this stuff. It's great for painting, but it makes good templates too. So anyway, I'll get this side put together. This one's clamped on. I'll do my measuring and get the router set up to make the cut. So I'll be back shortly. This is the start of our template, and I made a discovery yesterday. These two pieces of wood are just to help me lay the steel on without scratching anything. The piece of steel, which is over here on the bench, on our right side, it has, right in here is the high point. It's out maybe 3/32. So it's just a tad bit bent. So therefore the straight template would not work. So what I've done, and this is the proper location for the steel in the template. See, I have everything marked on one end with an X. So if you just take this piece of steel and lift it straight up, move it over and set it on top, the opposing edge, in theory, should give me the right curve. So I did that, and lo and behold, it works really well. And I don't know if you can see this line where the steel hits the wood, but there's no gaps. So that all came together really, really well. So if you ever run into a problem like this when you're trying to do an inlay, just keep this in mind, that you could just take your piece, lift it straight up, move it over, and set it on top and work off the opposing edge. And then this edge is the edge that I used to cut the other board. Now you can see on the end here where the router stopped cutting. It would have dropped off the steel, so I had to be careful here. But this Sharpie line on both ends, this is what I'll line up with the edge of the table, or the ends of the table. So let me get all of this stuff put on and anchored down, and we'll take another look. Okay, I have all the pieces on now. Got the steel laying in the center. So this left side, I anchored down first and I put it on my marks. Put the piece of steel in place, and I took the right side and pushed it to the steel. Let the steel do the spacing instead of trying to measure it. Or whatever it may be, let it do the spacing. And they're clamped on both ends. And then I put 3 blocks down each side with a clamp. I don't want this thing to move at all when I start cutting. And I didn't show you a while ago, but the router set up for that cut up next to the steel, I think you can see there's just barely any bearing sticking out the bottom of this thing. But take your time, take it easy, works just fine. So I have to change the base on the router. I have a wide base I've made that will support it over this wide groove. So let me get the router set up and we'll come back and cut some chips. Alright, this is my router base. It's a piece of 1/4 inch MDF core with maple veneer on each side. It just has a couple of pieces of wood on it just to stiffen it so it won't flex. And they're spaced far enough apart that the router will sit down in between. So, all I have to do now is remember how to put it together. Hope it goes this way, I think. Alright. I just took my little grinder and gave myself a little bit more room here. Apparently, I had set this base up for one of my other D-handle routers, which I love these things and I have many. So, let's put her together. Alright, so the base is on. Let me find a couple of pieces and we'll do the height adjustment here. Be right back. Right, we're back one more time. I've changed the router bit. This router bit, too much cutter. I couldn't get it adjusted in the template with a shallow depth like I need. So anyway, smaller bit. This is a piece of the plywood that the template's made out of. A piece of 3/16 steel, and again, just ever so slight, the router bit's a little bit higher than the steel, so I would rather the steel be too deep than not deep enough. So let me get this tightened up, and this might be a good time for a cup of coffee before I sit down and have a cup of coffee before I go after this cut, because it's going to take a while to do it with this small bit. But let me have some coffee, get this set up, and I'll bring you back during the cut. Alright, here we go. Router. So what I'm going to do first is cut a little place in the center. So that way, for some reason, if I'm messing this up, it won't hurt anything. So I'm just going to tilt it up. I want to take my piece of steel, a little bump. Yeah. Need to go a little deeper. Alright, I've given myself a little bit more depth. Yep. Well, that feels really good. So let's get on with this cutting. Well, there it is. It's in. So I guess the next step now is to make the template and cut each end for the big steel. So we'll get onto that template and I'll walk you down it here and let you see it. I think it looks good. I think it looks really good. So we get the big steel done, then we can start cleaning some of this stuff up, getting screws in it. I do finally have my machine screws, so I'll get to work on that. Anyway, I think I'll get to making this template for the end, get those router cuts done, get that out of the way, pour up a little bit, and then we'll move on. Well, you can see here that I have made the template. It's just 2 long boards about as wide as the table, and the big reason I had to do that was to get the clamps away because I'm still using my big router template so I don't fall in the hole. Put screws in and sanded it off nice and flush. I have it lined up. I doubled my clamps just to make sure it come too far to make a mistake and cut it wrong. Now, after part 1 video, I had a comment that I need to show Ray, so he's over here giggling.
Here's Ray.
And this is Ray. This is my friend. He's retired. His wife kicks him out of the house, so he comes down here and plays on the metal lathe. So anyway, let me get this router going, and we'll make this first cut. All right, got it set up. Got my router put together. Cross your fingers. Let's hope this works. It's a rather large cut. So here we go. Doing here, this is the big steel, and the fact that this one is under the 3/16 plate, we have to take 3/16 off of this 2-inch piece of steel. Now I've already gone through and cleaned up the ends and got it down to 8 inches. So this is the first cut. This is 100 thousandths. Then we'll come back and take one more at 875, and we'll be good to go. Get this done and I'll bring you back. All right, I got them milled down to 1 inch and 13/16 tall, so now they're flush on the bottom. And I face milled them just a little bit because my 1-inch depth, it was a little bit tight. This gave me some adjusting room, and my upper steel is slightly lapping over, which is good. I can take that off at the end. And I've come back with a 1/4-inch drill bit and done a pilot hole in my thick steel. So now, other end the same way. Now I'm going to take them out, go to the mill, and finish drilling that 1/4-inch hole, and then I'll thread them. The new bolts are actually 5/16, and the 5/16 screw was big enough to give me the head size that I wanted. So I'll get them drilled and tapped, and we'll come back and stick one in and see what it looks like. All right, I have drilled and tapped this one big block. So now I'll go to the other end and get it drilled and tapped. Then I'll move over to these, drill these out with a 1/4-inch, tap them to 5/16, and then I'll use an end mill to open this hole up at the top down to the thread. So anyway, I'll bring you back when I get into tapping on this next one and show you what that looks like, using the mill to do it. All right, This is the big steel for the end of the table. I've drilled a 1/4 inch hole in it. Now this is a 5/16 tap. And I just put a little drill center into the mill. There's a little hole in the end of the tap, and this just helps me hold it straight. So I can get started tapping this. And they make a spring-loaded tap center that you can use. So you just pull it down, lock the quill, and it keeps some tension on it, and you can use both hands. But this is the starting tap, and once you get it started straight, it'll stay up fine, and then you can just work it. Use a little bit of tap magic on it. And just work it down. Every now and then I check it with a little center and make sure I'm staying centered. Looks good. So anyway, we'll get this tapped. We'll move on to the small pieces of steel here in a few minutes, and I'll show you the process when we use the end mill to open up part of it in the countersink. So I'll bring you back. All right, this is still the big piece of steel, and I put a 1/2 inch bit in the mill, and I'm going to drill a hole in each end. Again, that's decorative, just like the small pieces over here in the table with the hole. I just think it, you know, with this industrial, it's like reclaimed look, it just looked like it used to do something. So I just think it adds to it. Totally unnecessary, but I think it adds to it. Now, I didn't show you a while ago, in my mess here, this tap, you can see it has a long taper. This is the starting tap. And once you get that one in, you switch over and you see the threads go pretty much to the end of this one. This is the bottoming tap. And this is that little center I was using. And it just fits in that little hole right there to help you get it tapped in straight. And believe me, you can tap it crooked, which is a real disappointment when you go to put it all together. And in all of this process, you know, I have this milling machine, and maybe you're thinking, well, I can't do this. I don't have a machine like that. And you can do most all of this with a drill press. So, you know, milling machine's not a good excuse. I just happen to have a milling machine, and for many years I did not have one. And as far as cutting the steel, cutting these little angle parts and stuff, you can do all of that with a hand grinder. Several different smaller saws you can do it. So there's many different ways, but you could grind it, you could plasma cut it, just and then go to the grinder and square it up or get your lines back straight. So you can do all of this without some of the fancier machines that I'm fortunate enough to have. So anyway, I'm going to get these holes drilled, and then we'll start on the small parts, and we'll get back to you when we do that. Yeah, I just thought real quick before I get too much further along, I'm going to show you guys how this metal first started, what the parts are, if you ever want to do something kind of like this, kind of stuff you want to hunt. Now this big bar that's in my saw, that's the heavy steel that we're using on the end. That's a 1 inch by 2 inch steel bar, cold roll steel. Never hot rolled because it has a mill scale on it. And then the other steel was just, I don't see the one I was using, but it's just a flat strap like this right here. And you just cut it to length and go from there. Now, if you ever get into playing with metal and you think you want a saw, I highly recommend these bandsaws. This thing is awesome. It has cut a lot of steel for me, and it does a great job. It cuts really straight and true. It cuts angles, and it pivots like a miter box, where most metal saws, you pivot to work. So this thing works really well. So if you think you ever want one, this is the way to go. These are the small pieces. So I've drilled a 1/4 inch hole. Now I'm going to run this countersink. kind of a slow process. Almost. Now I like to just check it with the screw upside down, and it needs just a little bit more. I like to see the whole screw sitting in the counter bore there. So we'll go just a little bit more. Alright. Now we're going to call that good. Our screw fits in nicely, and here's one I already have done, so this is what it's going to look like. So that's number 2, and then I got to do 2 more, and then we're going to pretty much test fit everything for the last time before we start finishing the metal. Alright, just a quick walk around. You can see they're all done. I think all I have left to do metal wise is round this top edge and sand it a little bit, make sure it's all flush. Both ends look the same, so I get those 2 rounded off and it'll be finish time. Alright, good morning. It's a new day, and I kind of changed my mind on the direction here. I think I'm installing all the steel, and I'm going to do the finish with it in place. The big long piece of steel down the center, I used an etching primer and sprayed the back side of it. So that way, if anything should ever get up underneath it, it will hopefully be fine. But it'll be a long, long time from now. So anyway, the little guys are in, the screws are in, nice and flush. You can see I have screws down to here in the big steel. This one's in, so this end's pretty much done. So I'm going to take you down here and show you this process. Again, I've rounded the steel. Everything's good. I have the 2 machine screws in. And on these little ones, if you'll remember, they're cut just slightly low. So what works really well is just like a little short countersunk screw. I have one here. Now, this screw will be about right here. So I have one just on each side of the big wood screw. And you can run these up and down to adjust for your level and your flushness. So I've got them pretty much adjusted on this one. So there it is. It feels real good. And I'm going to use this setup. It's just a long wood screw, and the nut is just so the screw doesn't pull through the washer, and a big fender washer. And I'm going to go in the end hole, and that will pull it in tight. And the other thing I'm going to do is take some of this glue all underneath, and between the wood screw pulling it down and this screw pushing it forward, that'll put it in place, and I'll let it sit for several hours, like the other end sit overnight. This glue squished out all around, I cleaned it off, and this stuff stays a little bit pliable. So I don't think we'll ever have any problem with that coming apart. And on drilling these screws, let's see if I can get you set up here. The first step of that is I use what they call a Bix bit. It has this round end which will center itself in the countersunk hole, and then it has a little drill bit inside. So we go in the hole, and the Bix bit gives us a nice center hole with our countersink. Then I'm going to take another little drill bit. These are some big old gnarly wood screws. And I don't want to go out the bottom side here. I need to be kind of careful. And then there is the screw. And it needs to be blown out and the screw goes in. And I use this straight screwdriver socket and a ratchet. Even with all of that pre-drilling, it's still a pretty tight fit. Almost. A little bit. That feels great. Now the only other thing that I can think of that I didn't tell you, if you look through the holes, you'll see blue. What that is the 2-inch wide masking tape. There's about 3 layers of that. And the steel's a little bit proud. As you tighten the screw, it will crush into that tape. And we're able to get our nice flush feel. So anyway, let me get all the screws in, we'll come back and we'll do some finish. Alright, got all the screws in, everything's tight, done, nice and flush. Go around it, I rubbed it with a rag with my hands, making sure there's no little slivers sticking up that might scratch or hurt somebody. So we're ready for the finish, and let's talk about that. I have to follow what I did on the legs back when I did that. You can see this is just an artist enamel paint, nothing fancy. I don't know, probably less than $1 a bottle. And again, it's just an artist oil. It's burn umber. And you can see here on the end that I've massaged a little bit of the black in around the screws and stuff. And that's about all I'm going to do to it. Again, around the screws, here and here. And once I get that done, I'm going to tape up the wood, and I'm going to put a coat of lacquer on the steel just to protect it. And I am going to take a Scotch-Brite and scuff up the tabletop. With all the work and rubbing and everything on it, it shined it up a little bit. And I don't like it shiny. I like it a little bit duller. So I'm going to Scotch-Brite it all at the end and call it good. And we'll take it back up to the gallery and see if we can't find it a home. So I don't think there's much more to say about this. I've enjoyed making this video. I hope that you guys get something out of it. At least find it interesting. And please, if you can, give me a thumbs up, subscribe. I have some really interesting furniture stuff coming. So hope to see you again. And just remember, thumbs up and subscribe would be great. Thank you.